And we're on. And there's just some really beautiful and important things that come not from the setting, not so much from the setting up of the problem that this parable is about, but how the master of the vineyard, the master comes in to address it and fix it. So that's the part of the discussion that I most wanted to get to, and that we've been trying to set up. So there's a lot of things and connections that we've tried to make here so that we can talk about this parable in an informed way. We'll still try to do that and when it makes sense, but we're going to stick more to the scripture today than to the other things. But happy Thanksgiving and happy Sabbath day, and welcome you all here today. I'll say a prayer to start us off, if you would join me. Dear Heavenly Father, we come before you this morning very grateful for your love and for the way that you work with us. And we find ourselves that we can have hope and joy because of the gift of your Son, and because we can know that your promises are sure. And we pray that as we learn about you and seek to understand your ways, that this would have an effect on our souls, and that these words would not just be things to know, but your words would have an impact on us and the things that we choose, the things that we seek after, the things that we love, and that we would know that there is a God who pursues us, and a God that has our best interest in his concern. And so we pray this day that we would be guided by your Holy Spirit, that your Spirit would descend upon this place, upon this congregation, upon our gathering, and the worship to follow, that we might not do those things or anything that would be offensive to you, but that we would be humble, and we would approach your throne with charity. And so we pray these things in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. So we've done a lot of things. Talked a lot about olive trees the last few weeks. We started out by listening to our Australian friend read a little bit from Romans, where Paul talks about the olive tree and he talks about grafting in a really similar way to what is here in the Book of Mormon. But we also noticed that the whole focus of his reading, and that he even stopped his reading in a way that focuses the story on the Gentiles. That we understand that we have a mother tree that represents the covenant or God's relationship with his people. We have wild trees that represent other groups that are grafted into it. And it's really easy to focus just on the beginning of that story, and that's where he stops. Is wild trees are grafted into a natural tree, and wow, we get to take advantage of this natural tree. But what we'll see at the end of this story is the end doesn't come until the story's done. The harvest comes, and then the end comes. But things need to happen in the course of history for the end to come. And they're ordained to happen that way. And so that's really important for what we're going to notice today. Last week we also watched this video that I thought was pretty cool of the world's oldest olive tree. And we're noticing that if you just look at it it appears to be dead inside. It's hollow. It looks like it wouldn't do anything. But we talked about how God can make things that are dead seem alive. Or God can take things that seem dead and make them accomplish his purposes. So that's important. I did this yesterday. I looked at this yesterday. We've been talking a lot about fruit here. So these are two pictures of olive fruit. The fruit on the left is a wild olive fruit, and the fruit on the right is domesticated olive fruit. And so I just wanted a visual for us that when we're talking about fruit that's not good, or fruit that comes in many shapes and forms, as we read through the parable today, the reason the wild olive fruit is not good is because it's small, it's hard, it doesn't have flavor, it's bitter, and in this particular picture, we have all kinds of different colors. So this wild olive fruit, it's ready to harvest at all kinds of different times. And some of it's dried up, some of it's shriveled, some of it's ready, some of it's overripe. The wild olive tree does not produce that are good for man. And so when we hear about bad fruit, we got to be thinking about that this is fruit that's not useful. It's there, but it's not useful for man. You can't turn it into good oil. You can't cook with it. It's not pure enough to light with. It's just not useful. As opposed to good fruit, which is larger and has been made over time to be useful. So the last thing I wanted to talk a little bit about before we get started is this word. We're going to see this word here in a little bit. I gave you the wrong word a few weeks ago. There's a really important word. I said haughtiness, and that was the wrong word. It's loftiness. They're sort of the same thing. Sort of the same word, which is probably why I got confused. But we're going to see this word, and I think it's really important to the story. So who has an idea what loftiness means? When you see that word, what comes to mind? Pride. Lifted up. Yep. Anything else? Superiority. Uh-huh. So people thinking that they're superior to something, or an individual thinking that they're superior to something. If we were to Google that, all of those words would be what we would find. I want you to remember the word loftiness when we come to it, because there's a discussion in here about what goes wrong with a vineyard, what goes wrong with a tree. And the servant says, I think it's because of the loftiness of the vineyard. So to stick with the parable, we'll wait till we get to that part. But I think it's sort of important to what happens in the story. Okay. So that takes us to our scriptures. So we had a question: How can the house of Israel ever cling to Jesus Christ as their Savior? How can that ever happen? And so we have a parable of a tree. We have a tree that's essentially dying. The branches are not allowing the roots to be successful, and the fruit it's not bearing fruit. And so the solution is to graft the tree, to take branches from the natural tree and put them in different parts of the vineyard, and take branches from wild trees and bring them into the natural tree. And so that grafting takes place, And we read that initially, in that third section, that was successful. And that all of the trees brought forth good fruit. So initially, this is good, right? In the long run, we'll find that it's not successful. So that's sort of where we're going to pick up today. So we have wild trees wild branches on a natural tree, and natural branches on a wild tree. And the goal is that everything bear good fruit. So we're going to pick up today after this initial part where we have trees with good fruit, and we're going to see what happens after that. So we're going to pick up at verse 72. And we'll read these chunks and talk about them because they sort of are different steps in the story. So, who would like to read? Perfect timing. Who would like to read from 72 to 88 as we read about the fruit that starts to go bad on the vineyard? Cheryl, you want to read? You'll need to put the microphone just close to your... You won't even hear it because it goes upstairs. 72 to 88.
And it came to pass that a long time had passed away, and the Lord of the vineyard said unto his servant, Come, let us go down into the vineyard, that we may labor again in the vineyard. For behold, the time draweth near, and the end soon cometh. Wherefore I must lay up fruit against the season unto mine own self. And it came to pass that the Lord of the vineyard and the servant went down into the vineyard. And they came to the tree whose natural branches had been broken off, and the wild branches had been grafted in. And behold, all sorts of fruit did cumber the tree. And it came to pass that the Lord of the vineyard did taste of the fruit, every sort according to its number. And the Lord of the vineyard said, Behold, this long time have we nourished this tree, and I have laid up unto myself against the season much fruit. But behold, this time it hath brought forth much fruit, and there is none of it which is good. And behold, there are all kinds of bad fruit, and it profiteth me nothing, notwithstanding all our labor. And now it grieveth me that I should lose this tree. And the Lord of the vineyard said unto the servant, What shall we do unto the tree, that I may preserve again good fruit thereof unto mine own self? And the servant said unto his master, Behold, because thou didst graft in the branches the wild olive tree, they have nourished the roots, that they are alive, and they have not perished. Wherefore thou beholdest that they are yet good. And it came to pass that the Lord of the vineyard said unto his servant, The tree profiteth me nothing, and the roots thereof profiteth me nothing, so long as it shall bring forth evil fruit. Nevertheless I know that the roots are good, and for mine own purpose I have preserved them, and because of their much strength they have hitherto brought forth from the wild branches good fruit. But behold, the wild branches have grown and have overrun the roots thereof. And because that the wild branches have overcome the roots thereof, it hath brought forth much evil fruit. And because that it hath brought forth so much evil fruit, thou beholdest that it beginneth to perish, and it will soon become ripened, that it may be cast into the fire, except we should do something for it to preserve it. And it came to pass that the Lord of the vineyard said unto his servant, Let us go down into the nethermost parts of the vineyard, and behold, if the natural branches have also brought forth evil fruit. And it came to pass that they went down into the nethermost parts of the vineyard, and it came to pass that they beheld that the fruit of the natural branches had become corrupt also, yea, the first and the second, and also the last, and they had all become corrupt. And the wild fruit of the last had overcome that part of the tree which brought forth good fruit, even that the branch had withered away and died.
So this is sort of like a sad part of the story, because we know that really what the master wants is he wants fruit. That's the part of the tree. That's why we have the tree, is fruit, is the outpouring of the Spirit that comes from the roots and the branches that is beneficial for everyone. But this is the part of the story that has to happen, right? To save the tree, the wild branches had to be brought in. And so just go back into biology here, we talked about this process, about how trees work last week. It's called transpiration. You have to have vibrant branches. You have to have branches that are alive on a tree to move water throughout the tree. And if you don't have water moving through the tree, then the root rots because the water just gets stuck there, and then the tree dies. So from a biological standpoint, right, from the temporal standpoint in the story, branches had to be brought in to keep the roots alive, because the branches that were there were not vibrant enough to keep the roots alive. Thoughts about that?
So the tree was dying, and he grafted in wild branches, but those still produced their wild fruit, although it saved the roots.
They produced good fruit at the beginning, but then over time, as they came back to the vineyard, they began to produce not good fruit. So we know that the wild branches are people that are brought into the covenant, right? If the tree is the covenant, then the wild branches are those that are brought into the covenant. And I think it's correct to say that, the Gentiles that are brought into the covenant, that's you and me and every Christian in the world, have been brought into the covenant. So those that believe, they're saved under this covenant that the Lord has made through Abraham to the people of the world. And so they have kept the tree alive, right? They're in the covenant. We know that, what is the response to Jews to Jesus Christ?
The response of Jews to
What was the response of the Jews to Jesus Christ?
They rejected him.
most rejected.
They rejected him. And when Paul goes throughout Europe trying to preach Jesus Christ, who stops him everywhere? The Jews do, right? So how do you keep the covenant of Jesus Christ alive if the covenant people won't accept the method of the covenant? You bring people in. And that's what we talked about before, is that's how olive trees become successful, is that's how they become domesticated. And that's the process of making them better, is to bring people in, branches in, to bring in new traits and disease resistance and things like that.
New blood.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that process would be the scattering of Israel.
The scattering of Israel. Mm-hmm. So when natural branches are scattered, we're taken off and put in different parts of the vineyard, that's the scattering of the house of Israel, right? This is a physical scattering, right, of the house of Israel. This sprint mentions 3 places, 3 locations, 3 wild olive trees, but I think that, clearly there's more places that the house of Israel is than 3. It's just this is a story, and it's trying to get the main idea across. Okay, so we have people brought into the covenant, people scattered away from the covenant, and then this has kept the tree alive, the covenant alive, has kept the roots alive all of this time. Okay, but over the millennia, right, we have less good fruit coming out of this grafting than perhaps when it started. That is what the story is telling us. There's the fruit that's coming out of this covenant at the end times is not what it used to be. And the Lord of the vineyard would like to see more fruit, more good fruit come off of this tree. Okay? So we have a master plan that we're seeing here. Okay? So right now we're talking about this bad fruit. Any other thoughts about particular ideas in this passage that are mentioned that stand out to you?
Well, the process of the vineyard and the harvesting and the gathering of the good fruit, and it's still going on today, isn't it?
Yep. And that's what we're going to see is as the story goes on, we're not done with that harvest. It's not happened yet. The last part of the story hasn't happened yet. But it has to happen for everything else to happen. The last thing that's mentioned here is sort of how we ended last time, that there are 3 places that are mentioned where these branches are scattered. 2 are in poor pieces of ground, and 1 is in a choice piece of ground. And here in verse 88, we have this mentioned, the wild fruit of the last. This is the fruit placed in the choice piece of ground, had overcome that part of the tree which brought forth good fruit, even that branch had withered away and died. So we had made the connection to that the Nephites, the house of Lehi, was brought to this land, a choice land, the promised land. And before we had heard that there was a wild branch and a good branch, right? Part of the tree was good, part of the tree was wild. And that we connected to the Lehites, the Nephites and Lamanites. In here at this time we see that in that last tree, the parts of the tree that were good had died, and only the wild part had remained. So we know the end of the story of the Book of Mormon is, right, that those that knew Jesus Christ are, those that know about the gospel are destroyed because they become evil too. So at the end of the story of the Book of Mormon, nobody is there with the gospel anymore. Any thoughts? Any more thoughts?
I wish they would you'd give a time frame in this, like from the grafting in, how long it takes for that to take hold and bear fruit, to really start nourishing the tree to come back. I mean, I guess how long a period is that?
Oh, yeah. All we have is a long time passed away.
Yeah, that's
Uh-huh.
I just curious, time frame wise. I guess you shouldn't worry about time, I guess.
I'm assuming it takes a while for a branch to graft, to leaf out, to grow, and to produce fruit, and that there's a time for even in a vineyard of years for that to happen.
Does the wild fruit ever produce good fruit? Can it change and save the tree and produce good fruit? Or is it always that they die?
No, I think that, well, what we'll see in this story is that with careful maintenance, that which is wild can be preserved and improved over time. And that's what happens in this story. So the reason we talked about loftiness is what we'll hear in the next section, is why does what was once good fruit become wild fruit? Or why does it become evil fruit? So that's a discussion we'll hear when we read this next section, which is, this is what the Lord of the vineyard does to rectify this problem. So we have a covenant, and we have Gentiles grafted into the covenant, and we have Jews scattered. And in this status, no one is doing well. In this, which is necessary for the saving of the covenant, saving of the tree, without the natural branches on the natural tree, the tree is not going to produce the fruit it's destined to. It's not going to be as fruitful, as beautiful, as useful as it could be. This grafting and scattering had to happen, but also what has to happen is the grafting back in. And without that, the story can't happen right. So that's the next part. So we may have to stop after 114 today, but we'll see. This is a longer section, but again, there's some repetition of words and ideas, and so I think it all sort of fits together with one idea. So we need a reader for 89 to 114. And I may stop in the middle. I don't know. We'll see. You want to read, Ken? You just unmute that. Yeah. 89 and 114.
And it came to pass that the Lord of the vineyard wept and said unto the servant, What could I have done more for my vineyard? Behold, I knew that all the fruit of the vineyard, save it were these, had become corrupted. And now these which have once brought forth good fruit have also become corrupted. And now all the trees of my vineyard are good for nothing, save it be to hewn down and cast into the fire. And behold, this last, whose branch hath withered away, I did plant in a good spot of ground, yea, even that which was choice unto me above all other parts of the land of my vineyard. And thou beholdest that I also cut down that which cumbereth this spot of ground, that I might plant this tree in the stead thereof. And thou beholdest that a part thereof brought forth good fruit, and a part thereof brought forth wild fruit. And because I plucked not the branches thereof, and cast them into the fire, behold, they have overcome the good branch, that it has withered away.
And that little piece there is just elaborating on what we had just read about this last tree, where the Lamanites had overcome the Nephites, and there was a discussion earlier, well, I could have just cut that old branch off, but they decided to leave it and save it. But that had, leaving the wild branch had caused the good branch to die. So they're just sort of discussing all of that part, which again is just referencing Lamanites and Nephites and their response as part of the house of Israel. So we'll go on.
And now, behold, notwithstanding all the care which we have taken of my vineyard, the trees thereof have become corrupted, that they bring forth no good fruit. And these I have hoped to preserve, to have laid up fruit thereof against the season unto mine own self. But behold, they have become like unto the wild olive tree, and they are of no worth, but to be hewn down and cast into the fire. And it grieveth me that I should lose them. But what could I have done more in my vineyard? Have I slackened my hand, that I have not nourished it? Nay, I have nourished it, and have digged about it, and I have pruned it, and I have dunged it, and I have stretched forth mine hand almost all the day long, and the end draweth nigh. And it grieveth me that I should hew down all the trees of my vineyard, and cast them into the fire, that they should be burned. Who is it that has corrupted my vineyard? And it came to pass that the servant said unto his master, Is it not the loftiness of thy vineyard? Hath not the branches thereof overcome the roots which are good? And because the branches have overcome the roots thereof, behold, they grew faster than the strength of the roots, taking strength unto themselves. Behold, I say, is not this the case, that the trees of the vineyard have become corrupted? And it came to pass that the Lord of the vineyard said unto the servant, Let us go to, and hew down the trees of the vineyard, and cast them into the fire, that they shall not cumber the ground of my vineyard. For I have done all, what could I have done more for my vineyard? But behold, the servant said unto the Lord of the vineyard, Spare it a little longer. And the Lord said, Yea, I will spare it a little longer, for it grieveth me that I should lose the trees of my vineyard. Wherefore let us take of the branches of these which I have planted in the nethermost parts of my vineyard, and let us graft them into the tree from whence they came. And let us pluck from the tree whose fruit is most bitter, and graft in the natural branches of the tree in the stead thereof. And this will I do, that the tree may not perish, that perhaps I may preserve unto myself the roots thereof for mine own purpose.
So in this last section here, they're going to describe about doing the thing, which they have introduced right here, is we're going to reclaim this tree by taking the natural branches which have been placed all over the place, cut them off from the wild tree on which they are currently in, and bring them back to the natural tree and place them back where they came from. Okay? What's going to happen to the wild branches on the natural tree? You got to make room for the natural branches, right? But it doesn't say all of them, does it? So 113 says, they'll pluck off from the tree those branches whose fruit is most bitter, and graft in the natural branches of the tree in the stead thereof. So the tree is still going to be containing, right, other people. That covenant is still containing other people. It's just that those parts of the tree that have been least successful, right, or are not part of that, really not part of that tree, they'll be removed only because they're not producing fruit. And then those natural branches will come back in. Okay? There's a lot of verses talking about this to come, and so there's a little bit of repetition. It's important though, but there's a little bit of repetition there. So this is the answer to how is this tree going to bring forth good fruit? Well, the natural branches have to be back. So that means the house of Israel has to be back. They have to be brought back into the covenant, right? And who does that?
Today, the Gentiles are helping the Jews come to Christ.
The Gentiles will help with that. The master of the vineyard has to be directing it, right? He's going to ask his servants, go do this. We'll see here in a minute how he describes his servants. All right. Other thoughts that you want to talk about from this section?
I've always thought it interesting that the master of the vineyard is all about saving his tree. And he comes to this point, and he gets so disgusted, he says, fine, let's cut them all down. But the servant says, no, wait. Their roles have reversed from when the story began. At the beginning, the servant said, well, why are you going to do this? Because I want to. Mm-hmm. And here he says, okay, we're going to cut them all down. And the servant says, no, wait. The master says, okay, we'll do some more.
So what are your thoughts about the master and the servant? Because I have a thought, but I want to know what you guys think.
It kind of reminds me of the story in the Bible where Abraham was bargaining with God, if there's just 20 people here, please save the city, or he keeps coming up with this numbers and God agrees to save up to a certain point, then God won't give in anymore. And I'm talking about Sodom and Gomorrah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Moses did similarly. I mean, God was sort of fed up when he gave the Ten Commandments, and
all the people worship the golden calf, and he was just gonna wipe the people out, and he said, no, then, at least Moses petitioned him to wait a little bit longer, lest all the other nations think, let him out here just to destroy them.
Yeah, there's tons of examples, even in the Book of Mormon, about the Lord's servants asking for the Lord to bless people, even though praying, that's what we'll read in Enos, if we read Enos, praying for their enemies, for those that don't know him yet, lifting them up on their behalf. So
It's almost like
there's
God is testing human faith.
there's absolutely that part.
Well, you, in 104, 5, and 6, you know, the master says, you know, who is it that corrupted my vineyard? And then the servants said to his master, is it the loftiness of the vineyard? You know, the branches have overcome the roots. So it appears that there was a time where they let it go. Because
Yeah, I would
they
agree.
didn't do the pruning, so there was a period of time when they let the vineyard go
To the growing season.
and wander, or do whatever you want to call it,
Uh-huh.
where they didn't maintain it properly, maybe. I mean, just from what it says here, it's like, you know, what happened to my vineyard? Well, it's because it's become overgrown, it's lofty, it's become high.
Mhm.
So, to me, it seems, I mean, I don't know, so there was a period of time when we're just allowed to go and to do, and we don't take care of things properly.
You're saying that the church might be corrupt, possibly?
They're just, I'm just saying.
We could label things.
Things have just gone wild.
Mhm. Well, I think that if you know in the growing season that there are times to prune, and if you prune in other times, it's bad for the tree, it's bad for the thing. So different, I think usually spring and fall, before and after that growing season, there's times for pruning, but during the growing season, it has to be left alone because you're going to stunt its growth when it's hot if you're cutting things and moving things. So it needs to be done at the right time or else it's bad, and we're interested in having fruit. I don't know if there's I don't know what the answer is on the first question about the servant and the master. The way that I read it and pondered it is there's a justice and a mercy part of God, and to reveal that justice and mercy part of God, we have this dialogue that takes place to show what should happen, but what does happen because of God's love. He then elicits servants, and what we read sort of about other people, right, to come and join in the labor. But that's how I read it, is just to show the heart of God. We have this interaction between that justice and mercy, what we deserve and what we get. But I'm not an expert in that. That second question, though, about why does the vineyard not successful, that Ken brought up, is our magic word here, our vocabulary word for today, loftiness. So what happens to the tree? What does it mean that the branches have taken strength and grown faster than the strength of the roots? What is it? What do you imagine the tree looking like?
Wild and overgrown, kind of out of shape, out of character for a tree, I guess.
And that's sort of why we watched that pruning video. Is remember that the guy talked about when the tree got too tall, right? He had to trim off the tops, and he said these aren't good for anything, right?
He also trimmed in the middle, too.
And he trimmed in the middle.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
He took quite a bit out.
He knew how to shape it and what to keep to make sure it would produce fruit. And so if you can imagine, like, if you grow things, sometimes under the wrong conditions, the thing, whether it's a vegetable or whatever, it'll just grow. We call bolting, right? It'll just grow. The branches will grow, and the tree looks great, but it's not producing any fruit because all the energy is getting put into the branches, right? And none of the energy is getting put into the fruit. So the tree has to be maintained. The tree has to be conditioned. It has to have that maintaining piece to make sure that the branches don't just grow, that the energy of the tree is put there rather than into producing what the tree is meant to produce. And so if that's the temporal part of the story, what's the spiritual component to that? If the wild branches on the natural tree have become lofty,
We need guidance too.
we need trimming back too.
We need guidance too. Not
We
to
need
just-
trimming back too.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
not just to run amok on our own.
Need to be chastened.
So these wild branches on the natural tree, they did produce fruit, but because of the strength of the roots, they've grafted into the tree, and they've pulled in energy and water and strength out of it, and then those wild branches have grown, right? But they're just growing, and so the fruit they produce is little and small and not good. They haven't been trimmed back yet. They haven't been pruned back yet. And so there's a pride, perhaps a superiority that we can see perhaps in the Christian world that, right, it's about us. It's about, are we really focused on the covenant? Are we really focused on the love of God and making sure that others get it? Or are we holding on to it? Are we producing the fruit that we're meant to produce? Not just as a church, but as a Christian world. Are we living and breathing Jesus Christ to others? And the story tells us that this is not just, again, this is not this is not all about us. But as a Christian world, we've not lived or are not living in these latter days what we're meant to.
Well, this is probably a poor example, but that's just like we have lost people from Parkview because they go to other congregations that center everything around the children, and the children have more fun there, so they like going there more. So we're not focused on Christ. We're focused on the enjoyment of being with others and having a good time, because they have these elaborate activities for the kids to do, and they go to church for their kids to be happy.
It's even more than that. I mean, we're losing the kids, the teenagers
Yeah.
to church. Why is it? If you talk to like people in my age group, sometimes they don't feel like they get anything of coming to church on a daily basis. Well, I'm always of the opinion you get what you put into it. If you want to understand the Book of Mormon, read it, study it. It's just not going to come, ask, pray about it. But people younger than myself, some of them are going because their spouses go there. Others just stop going to church because, hey, it's another day off, mom's not making me go. So I know for myself, I've had many discussions, why are we losing the youth from the church? But at the same time, if you look up at the church, what we fought for the last 30 years, so could that be part of it? I know for myself in the restoration, that's what it was. Because we just got tired of, every 10 years, my friends are going to a different church. So, I think it's not just members, it's the youth, and eventually, you know, we're not gonna have a church if we can't keep our youth.
It's all important. So, some things that are important. This is a parable, right? It describes a condition. And if we say, okay, so we see that we're not seeing the fruit that we would like to see, that the things about the Spirit, that the richness of the Spirit that we once saw or we would like to see, we're not seeing those. Is it helpful to know that thousands of years ago, that the Lord saw, right, that what had happened or what had to happen here would result in this condition we see ourselves today, right? That none of this is a surprise, that this condition was told that it would be like that, right? And so, but that's not the end of the story, though, is it? There's more to happen, and when the Lord sets His hand to work and to accomplish the end of the story, the ending is a great ending, and it rectifies this. It rectifies all of that. So we're sort of in the hard part of the story right now, is we're not seeing the fruit we would like to see in our own lives, maybe around us. But that shouldn't mean that we can't do what is described next, is laboring in that vineyard to do what the Master wants. Other thoughts
Keep
there?
working. Do what the Master wants. Not what we want.
Do what the Master wants. Okay. Any other thoughts there?
We sure have to work with that a little bit, though. It's not, I've read that a couple of times over that, but I haven't read it lately, but tree, branches, you have to kind of concentrate on it to make sure you got that straight in your mind. I think it's a leadership.
Yeah, that's where we're going really slow. So
Repeat what he said, I couldn't hear anything.
he said that this parable can be confusing, and so you have to make sure you keep the parts straight, because it can be a little bit. If there's a lot of pronouns coming up, theys and thems, and when you use too many pronouns, you sort of lose who's who in that story. But as long as we have the beginning and the end right, I think we can figure out that part. But it can be a little confusing. Gerald, did you have your hand up? No?
If you ask most people in the church today, they would not even be aware that there is this story. They would not even be aware of it. I mean, it's a sad commentary, but it's true, I think.
Mm-hmm. And remember, the story is about a question, right? Again, we got to make sure we focus on the question, right? How can the house of Israel ever someone could say, how is it possible that the kingdom will ever come, right? how is it possible that the work that's been described since the beginning of the church in these latter days, how is it possible that that could ever happen? Right? And it would be easy to say, well, I see that, but I don't see how. Right? It would be easy to say, okay, so in the middle, I can't figure that out. So it's easy to lose hope, right?
Could you imagine being the saints when the RLDS church was established? I mean, you establish a church and then the country goes to at war with each other. So you're excited that we just reorganized the church, just Smith the Third's in charge, and now the country's at war with each other, and I'm sure they're being pressured to join one side or the other. I mean, that's the thing. I don't think you ever lose hope. I know for myself, that's what I hold on to every single day. Is when I see the world crumbling, I hold hope that I know who's in charge. I know there's an end, and I know who's in charge of that.
If we look back historically, there's always a righteous remnant. There's always a group of people that are faithful. Many are not, but there's always some that are.
Well,
In the Book of Mormon, it may be one person.
Yeah. I mean, who did when Christ was ready to be born? Who did he send? He didn't send a Nephite. He sent a former Lamanite, Samuel, to give the message to the Nephites who were supposed to be God's righteous people. There was always one through. I mean, even in the Bible. I mean, you had Jeremiah, you had Isaiah, you had Lehi. There was always one there, no matter what, had the truth, and they used that truth to keep it going. Now, eventually, the truth, which is right here, it was buried in the ground until Joseph Smith took it, but it was still preserved and it was still there, and we still have it today.
It was waiting for the faith of some Gentiles to come forth.
Yep.
And so to keep this covenant alive, in order to keep God's work in this world alive, right, people had to be brought into the covenant. Other people had to be brought in covenant besides the house of Israel. They were scattered to preserve them. Branches were brought in to preserve the covenant, but to make it all the way it needs to be, right, that last piece needs to happen, is the grafting back in of that covenant people back into the covenant. That makes the tree alive, right? And that makes this vineyard full of good fruit. And so that's what they describe as this grafting of the natural tree back into the tree. And it's done at the direction of the master. And again, we're going to hear this word like the servants were few, but they labored with all their mights in the vineyard. That's 137. So the Lord wants us to know that this grafting and scattering and the bad fruit that had to happen to preserve all of it, but that it's going to be fixed, right? He's going to fix it. He's going to make it all come back into harmony when he decides it's ready. So let's just keep going. Maybe we can read to 139 in 10 minutes, and sort of we'll have to finish next. We'll have to finish another time, but all right. I'll read 115 unless somebody else wants to read. And behold, the roots of the natural tree, branches of the tree, which I planted whithersoever I would, are yet alive. Wherefore, that I may preserve them also for mine own purpose, I will take of the branches of this tree, and I will graft them in unto them. Yea, I will graft in unto them the branches of their mother tree, that I may preserve the roots also unto myself, that when they shall be sufficiently strong, that perhaps they may bring forth good fruit unto me, and I may yet have glory in the fruit of my vineyard. And it came to pass that they took from the natural tree that which had become wild. They took it off and grafted in unto the natural trees, which had also become wild. And they also took of the natural tree which had become wild, and grafted into their mother tree. And the Lord of the vineyard saith unto the servant, Pluck not the wild branches of the trees, save it those that are most bitter, and in them you shall graft according to that which I have said. So we're removing only those that are most bitter, the most unsuccessful. But a lot of those people that have been grafted in are staying there. And we will nourish again the trees of the vineyard, and we will trim up the branches thereof, and we will pluck from the trees those branches which are ripened, that must perish, and cast them into the fire. And this I do, that perhaps the roots thereof may take strength because of their goodness, and because of the change of the branches, that the good may overcome the evil. And because that I have preserved the natural branches and the roots thereof, and I have grafted in the natural branches again into their mother tree, and have preserved the roots of the mother tree, that perhaps the trees of my vineyard may bring forth good fruit again, and that I may have joy again in the fruit of my vineyard, and perhaps that I may rejoice exceedingly that I have preserved the roots and the branches of the first fruit. Wherefore go to and call servants, that we may labor diligently with our mites in the vineyard, that we may prepare the way, that I may bring forth again the natural fruit, which natural fruit is good, and most precious above all other fruit. Wherefore let us go to and labor with our mites this last time, for behold, the end draweth nigh. And this is for the last time that I shall prune my vineyard, graft in the branches, begin at the last, that they may be first, and dig about the trees, both old and young, the first and the last and the first, that all may be nourished again for the last time. Wherefore dig about them, and prune them, and dung them once more for the last time, for the end draweth nigh. And if it so be that these last grafts shall grow, and bring forth the natural fruit, then ye shall prepare the way for them, that they may grow. And as they begin to grow, you shall clear away the branches which bring forth bitter fruit, according to the strength of the good and the size thereof. And ye shall not clear away all the bad at once, lest the roots of the tree be too strong for the graft, and the graft shall perish, and I shall lose the trees of my vineyard. So just stop it for a second. As we bring forth, put in new grafts, these natural branches back, if you cut off every single thing off that tree that's not working, the tree's going to die because there's no vibrant branches. So they're going to be trimmed and done over time so that all of it can work together. It grieved me, lest I should lose the trees of my vineyard. Wherefore you shall clear away the bad, according as the good shall grow, that the root and the top may be equal in strength, until the good shall overcome the bad, and the bad be hewn down and cast into the fire. And thus will I sweep away the bad out of my vineyard. And the branches of the natural tree will I graft in again unto the natural tree. I've read this verse so many times. Pay attention to that. There's two things, and they sound almost identical. The branches of the natural tree will I graft in again into the natural tree. And the branches of the natural tree will I graft into the natural branches of the tree. And thus will I bring them together again, that they shall bring forth the natural fruit, and it shall be one. And the bad shall be cast away, yea, even out of all the land of my vineyard. For behold, only this once will I prune my vineyard. And it came to pass that the Lord of the vineyard sent his servant, and the servant went and did as the Lord commanded, and brought forth other servants, and they were few. And the Lord of the vineyard said unto them, Go to, and labor in the vineyard with your mites. For behold, this is the last time I shall nourish my vineyard. For the end is nigh, and the season speedily cometh. And if you labor with your mites with me, you shall have joy in the fruit, which I shall lay up unto myself, against the time which will soon come. Okay, we gotta have to stop there. That didn't take too long. Stopping. Okay, what's going on there? Thoughts?
127, how many times do we read that in the Book of Mormon? That, you know, the last shall be first and the first should be last. I mean, he's describing this as the vineyard. But, I mean, that's not the only time that's ever brought up in the Book of Mormon. I think even Christ brought it up when he was here. I think that's important. I know I held on to that when I was younger because I always felt, man, I see everybody else in this different religion and why am I part of this religion? But then I always held on to that, hey, it's okay. It's okay to be the different guy, you know. It's okay to be different. No matter what someone says to you, no matter what someone says about the Book of Mormon or, you know, you're just a crazy Mormon. But I think that was always important because, you know, yeah, the last will be first and the first will be last. And that's what I held on to.
So God made his covenant with Abraham and said, through your seed will the earth be blessed. And that covenant, other people were added to that covenant over time, right? But that's the first covenant, and that's the last covenant. And everything else in the middle is people that have been added to that covenant over time. But it has to go back, right, to that original promise that's made to that house of Israel. So again, they might feel like that they've been forgotten, or it might look like the house of Israel can never come back to this knowledge of Jesus Christ. But that's the Lord's marvelous work in the end, is to make that grafting, make that come back together. That's the end of his marvelous work.
How many people of Israel today do you think could name one of the 12 tribes? I mean, if you look at their religion today,
I don't know.
I mean, it's so different than what it was.
I have no idea.
I mean, so, you know, I know we talked about this before, I just have a hard time understanding it is going to take God to bring them back. Just based on what they know. I mean, they don't even believe in Jesus Christ. I mean, because that's what they made the religion today. But I think it is going to take this, where it talked about that, you know, that the branches of natural tree will I graft again into the natural tree. And we could be part of that.
Well, the natural tree and then the branches too, because he said, I will graft in the natural branches to the natural tree, and then he's gonna take natural branches of the tree and graft them into branches. So not only is he grafting into the tree, he's actually grafting into those branches as well, so.
Yeah, I like, why would someone write the same thing twice and add only 2 words to that? So the natural branches coming back in are not just getting thrown into the tree. They're not getting thrown on top of old wild branches. They're going to be put back into natural branches, which I think is really interesting. It's very purposeful, right? It's got to fit. And, you know, the house of Israel has to be brought in a very specific way back into this covenant and into this knowledge, so they see it and they see their history and what's happened to them, and they see it in a new light, and that's how it has to fit. But they have to fit back
Very precise.
where they came from. And I wouldn't, so I think it's easy to sort of like fall in 2 camps, right? We have to do it all, or the Lord has to do it all. And sometimes we sort of fight on this, like, well, okay, we're not going to build Zion all by ourselves, right? We can't just go out there and build a city and say we got Zion. It'll never happen. And then there's the Lord's going to do it all. Let's just sit back and watch it, wait for it to happen, right? And I don't see either of those happening here. I see the Lord moving and calling people to labor with him. And you can't labor with God if you're not prepared to labor with him. If we go out and call for servants and there's only a few that labor with him, why are there only a few? Is there not because there's people out there? Or is it just because only a few are willing or interested to be a part of that work? It's probably not because there's not anybody out there, right? It's probably more that not everyone has prepared themselves to labor. And so for me, it doesn't have to be this or this, right? It's both. The Lord has to direct the work, but we have to be willing laborers in his work. We have to have that soft heart full of love to be directed by him to do his work whenever he calls.
It says all are called, few are chosen.
He said in there at one point, after he explained everything, well, let's us start to work now.
Mm-hmm.
So he is saying your equation.
Yeah, there's a specific place where he said, okay, it's time to graft now. It's time to graft now.
So let us labor
There are-
with our minds,
I use a baseball analogy here real quick. Billy Bean, who was the GM for the A, still is, back in 2003, came up with this wild idea of using analytics to get baseball players. And he looked for very specific things, and it had been tried before, and it was never thought it would actually work. But he turned it around where he went and he based those players on their stats. And he went and got them and turned it into winning 100 games. And now every baseball team does it in some ways. I almost think we have to do that too and understand that. Is that, again, we're not going out there looking for, the preachers that are on TV who have the money, who have this, or even say the Mormons. But the work will begin with us. But at the same time, we also can't be a people who just wait for it to happen. We have to be a people that want to go out there, want to bring it together, and bring the people together.
Where is it? I was looking for the cover sheet that we read. Oh, yeah, there it is. So let's remind ourselves again what this Book of Mormon is for, and what its purpose is, and then we'll have to break because it's time for service. It's to show unto the remnant of the house of Israel how great things the Lord has done for their fathers, that they may know of the covenants of the Lord, that they are not cast off forever. And to convincing of the Jew and Gentile that Jesus is the Christ, the eternal God, manifesting himself unto all nations. So, again, part of that grafting is this book, and the promises that are contained in it, and the way that it speaks not just to Gentiles but to the house of Israel, that the Lord has called to them. I just love the way that the Lord talks about the vineyard, in the way that he's worked. There's all this bad fruit, right? But he's saying, what more could I have done for my vineyard? I've worked it, I've pruned it, I've digged it, I've dunged it, I've stretched forth my hand all the day long, right? It's not from his lack of working. It's the lack of response, probably. But the Lord's heart for his people is all through this book. And again, I just think that there's so much for us to do and so much hope for us in this day and time that, if we would be laborers in his last kingdom, if we would be laborers for him, we would want to prepare for that day. We would want to look for opportunities right now to labor, to be his servants. So That's our calling. There's a little bit more, that end of the story, but again, it's a good end because everything works out just the way the Lord, the Master wanted it to. So that's how we'll have to end that story next time. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all.